It's a ham radio.
The Cadillac of ham radios.
Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of Ham Radio as Stranger Things podcast. We've got a great episode for you today as usual, but first, we have a little housekeeping to take care of, and I'm going to turn it over to Jasmin to let you know where you can find us on social media and where you can listen to the podcast.
Thanks, Ashley. You can find us on Instagram at Ham Radio Media, all one word, on Twitter at HamThrough, on YouTube at Ham Radio Media, or using our handle HamRadio1983. We also have a Discord you can join, which is linked in the description of this episode. If you have a fan theory or question you want to share, you can email us at hamradiomedia@gmail.com. Ashley also has a fanfic on AO3 entitled Stranger Things College, which is also linked in the description. The podcast is available on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and much more. If you like the show, please consider leaving us a rating or review. We have a lot of totally tubular stuff coming up, so be sure to follow us on social media to keep up with the podcast and all of our new content. Okay, so talking more about Steve as a character, what do you think attracted Steve to Nancy in season 1, seeing as they didn't run in the same circles?
Not even in the same circles, but they also are in different years too. I don't know. I suppose maybe he just saw her around. She's gorgeous, let's be real. So, of course, he's going to be attracted to her the moment he sees her. She's beautiful. She's smart. I don't know. Maybe he hears about her, sees her. I know that a couple of the writers have talked in the past about how Nancy was pursuing him or something like that, or had feelings for him, and that was kind of a thing. I don't know. They definitely kind of hint to a couple of things in the show. Nancy saying that they talked on the phone and stuff, that they had a whole conversation on the phone, and that he doesn't see her like that. And I wonder if half of that is Nancy herself trying to deny the relationship or whatever. But I figure they just see each other around. It's really hard not to walk through the halls and notice really attractive people while you're walking through school, right? Like just going on from one class to another.
Yeah, for sure. And have you seen the pics are blurry, but have you seen those really blurry pictures of the stuff in Nancy's room from season 1? Yeah.
Their little photo op picture, the little ones that you kind of get in the mall back in the day.
Yeah, and there's a note that he wrote her, and when he's talking about, you can't have looking at her during passing period. That's kind of my theory on that my little headcanon for this one is that, we know Steve at that time is a player and that he's dated a lot of girls. And my theory is, okay, he probably went through and dated, because Nancy rounds off that whole list. He probably went through and dated every girl in his year.
And then started looking at girls the next year younger when they came in or something.
Yeah, the next year down from him. Because a girl in the year above him isn't going to, if a girl's a senior, right, she's going to date someone in her own year. She's not going to date a junior. That
might have taken him a little seriously with him being King Steve, but still, he would have still known it would be easier to get a girl from the year younger. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's kind of my theory, that he was okay, I'm going to look at the year younger than me, and then what girls have I not talked to or dated? And then he saw Nancy during passing period and kind of oh, who's that? And, either asked around or just kind of walked up and started talking to her, kind of a thing. And upon discovering she did not have a boyfriend, kind of started courting her. And I think Nancy downplays it, but I think the Duffer Brothers have said that part of their decision to have Nancy and Steve wind up together at the end of season 1 is after, Steve's character was changed. It's it made sense, she was really supposed to have a Jonathan, but then it's it made sense that she would, gravitate back towards this guy that she's had a crush on for a really long time.
Yeah.
Heart is in the right place, and, she's been into for a long time. So that, the attraction was there on her end. Look at him. I feel like every girl at Hawkins was probably into Steve,
Absolutely.
If you're into guys. So, that was going to be there regardless. But that's kind of my little headcanon on that, he was looking for someone else to date, and then, he was probably thinking it was going to be somebody else to, have some fun with, and then he wound up falling in love with her.
I like thinking of him kind of like the introduction of, like, say if there was a post or pre-season 1, if what season before that would have been the first season of Steve and Nancy meeting. I like to think of it like how they introduce Oz and Buffy, where he sees Willow a couple times and he keeps seeing her and he's like, who's that girl? Who is that girl? Like every time he sees her. So I'm just imagining Steve like hanging out in the hall with some friends or something like that, and he sees Nancy go by and he's like, who's that girl? And then like maybe sometime when he's like out, hanging out with his friends at a diner or something, he sees like Nancy there grabbing like a sandwich for like, I don't know, some report with her friends that she's working on, and he just sees her walk by and he's like, who's that girl? Now I'm just imagining like every scenario of him meeting her. It's adorable. It's fun to think of. It's really cute. I'd love to know for sure though what the Duffers had in mind.
Yeah, I'd love to see that in like a flashback, or like
Right?
maybe once Steve and Nancy get together or start spending, well, they've been spending time together, but continue to spend more time together either after or as kind of we move towards the breakup between Nancy and Jonathan in season 5.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to see them kind of talk about their
Maybe mention it in
relationship.
passing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm picturing more like, they're talking, he's either being, there for her or comforting her, or they're talking about something else, and one of them makes a joke about something, or do you remember when, or that kind of thing.
Nancy being like, you never even looked at me until you were done with all the other girls. Like kind of like something like that. Like, right, like kind of just teasing and flirting with it. And she's like, and now, like, yeah, I love that. That would be so cute. Just a nice little throw in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love their banter and how they play off each other, like those actors play off each other. So I'd love to see them kind of exploring more of that. I love that part of season 4.
Oh yeah, the flirting. The flirting is so great. Oh my gosh. You almost shot me with that one. You almost deserved it. Just
Yeah.
so perfect. My goodness, the chemistry between them. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, they really do a fantastic chemistry, and other people have said this, but I would love to see, first of all, I need to see Joe Keery as a lead in a rom-com. This would be excellent.
Please. Yes.
And I'd love to see him and Natalia Dyer play love interests in something where that's the main story.
Yes.
Because they would be so good at it.
They've already got the chemistry and history of working together and everything. They're already Stancy. I would love to see them in a rom-com together.
Yeah, I loved when Joe Keery's character in Free Guy, like that was part of the story. Yeah.
I loved his and Millie's like story. That's the character's name. They're so adorable, and that like how they're looking at each other at the end. They just and like the scene when he's talking to her in, I think it's her apartment, when he's explaining like that they created the AI and that like this thing is real, and he touches her leg and he like nervously pulls back, and it's just, they're so cute. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to see him in a more focused setting, not so much with the main drop, I suppose, instead of the backdrop of like everything going on in Free Guy. It was a good movie though, a lot of fun.
Yeah, I loved Free Guy. I saw the movie like 4 times.
It's so good.
It's so good. My only complaint with that movie is the fact that like at the end it just says Keys and Millie embrace, it cuts to black, because I wish they'd lingered on that just a beat longer, because there's that, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's like a set photo from a deleted scene where Keys and Millie are standing on the other side of the road, like holding each other, and you can tell it's one of those like they've made out in the middle of the street, and then the car must have honked to them, and they were like, "Crap, let's get out of the road." And
don't get hit by a car.
Yeah. So because we know that means, and they embrace, they obviously filmed the kiss and them getting to the other side of the road. So
maybe they just felt it made more sense to cut it there. I don't know. I always wondered why they cut to black there. I'd be curious to know. Like, I mean, I suppose I didn't look into it myself, but I'd be curious to know the reason.
Yeah, I agree that ending with the embrace makes sense. I just wish they'd kept it like 1 beat or 1 minute longer, because they literally meet in the middle, and then you see them kiss, but like it's so, you know what I mean? Like, and then they fade to black like immediately. I wish they'd kept it just like a beat longer. Yeah.
It was a cute movie.
It's a very cute movie. I love that movie. So So, getting back to Steve, in your mind, is Steve a better person with or without Nancy, or were they just wrong for each other following Barb's death?
I know a lot of people have certain takes on this for, they needed to be without each other to become who they are, or whatever, that kind of stuff. I don't know if it's being a better person without or with her. I think he kind of needed to experience the rest of his arc, whether that would have been with her or without her. I think he was kind of forced into that position maybe a little faster than it would have taken him. The problem is, the way I see it, at least, the biggest problem with Steve in general is he would have gotten there regardless. He probably would have gotten there faster than most people anyway. It just, it would have taken longer regardless than Nancy needed. He needed something to kind of shove him out the door. I think he would have become the person that she needed eventually, pretty quickly. But it was never going to be at the speed that Nancy needed. So, I don't know. I guess I like to think what happened, and you don't really have an option of whether or not, right? But I think he would have become who he is in season 4, no matter whether they'd been broken up or stayed together. It just would have taken a little bit longer. He wouldn't have been, forced to kind of go along with Dustin, or maybe he would have. Maybe he still would have ended up going with Dustin, because there's no not Nancy being around that forces him into it. She easily could have been in the house and maybe he, dropped by or whatever. But it's the timing of it, right? He doesn't even get to the house. So Dustin easily could have been like, forget Nancy. This is more important. You need to come help me with this thing. And I can 100% see Steve, even in that moment, being like, okay, right now, and still going with him. Doesn't really matter. He would have eventually gotten there one way or another. He just needed another world-ending event to kind of get him there. Nancy is kind of like, I don't think she affects it at that point, whether she's with him or not.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he would have gotten where he needed to be eventually, with or without what happened with Nancy. Like, that's kind of like them dating and everything that happens is the catalyst for him realizing that he's like, I don't want to be this person. My friends are assholes. I don't want to do this. So I think that was definitely the catalyst. But
Yeah.
I agree. I think that he would have become the person we see now. That's kind of the natural evolution of his arc.
Yeah, he got the thump already. The thump happened when she smacked him across the face. Like, that happened. That already happened. So, like, yeah, exactly. He just would have, he would have gotten there. He's already on his way.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would have taken him a bit longer, and normally under normal circumstances that would have been totally fine. But what Nancy needed from him from the minute Barb disappeared was something he couldn't give. And in that moment, John was the only person who believed her. So
yeah,
I think because of that and because of how things happened, I agree. I think, he would have gotten there eventually. It would have taken him longer than Nancy needed it to. Or, if Barb hadn't disappeared, I think that changes things too, right? Because if Barb never disappears or dies, then his slower growth into the person he's meant to become, that slower growth would have been fine with Nancy probably. Because I think we still would have seen him ditch his friends and become a better person. It's just that Barb would have lived. And so that being slower would have been fine because Nancy wouldn't have had that urgency or needed him in that way at that time because Barb would have been fine.
Yeah, and the thing that sucks really is I think even Steve at the end of season 2, you kind of can see that he is at the point where I think he could have been enough at that point. Understanding that they're the ones that are going to have to do something about what's going on with the Upside Down and everything. Season 2, Steve was dragged in by Dustin and he went. He didn't fight Dustin on it. So if Nancy had dragged him along, he would have went along. If he was going along with Dustin, a kid he doesn't even know, has spent literally probably maybe a few minutes with at any other given time before that point, he still went along just fine. He didn't even question it. Well, he questioned it for literally 2 seconds, and Dustin just said, yes, let's go now. And he went. So I think that's more than enough proof that had had Nancy instead reached out to Steve to go and do all this stuff that her and Jonathan ultimately end up doing in season 2, he would have went along. He wouldn't have wanted to, but he would have.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've seen people comment on this, and I think it's right that that scene at the end of season 2 where, Steve says it's okay, Nance, and kind of gives his blessing and that whole thing, is that, this entire time, you see this throughout season 1 and 2, you have all these people, adults around Nancy, and also her peers. You have Jonathan, you have Barb, you have Flo at the station, you have Murray, you have all these, comes from mother, you have all these people around her saying that, basically saying, Steve's not a good person, you're settling by being with him, you should be with someone like Jonathan, he loves you, you have this trauma bond, like, you need to accept your true self, blah, blah, blah. Like, basically making her question all of her decisions by people that don't know the full story when she's
and
at
they
a
don't
very
know
vulnerable.
Steve. Yeah. Everything they know about Steve is completely surface level. Murray, who insists on the whole thing, doesn't even know Steve at all. He barely knows Nancy and Jonathan as well. So she's getting the worst kind of influences from people who don't seem to know her at all. You have Barb trying to hold her back, saying, this isn't you, when Nancy is not even doing anything absolutely crazy and outrageous. As far as I'm concerned, it's pretty damn tame for a 15, 16-year-old girl, what she's doing. She's not doing anything. She's not like snorting cocaine or something. She's drinking a beer with a cute boy and then going up to his room. Like, that's a pretty typical teenage girl thing.
Yeah, and that was kind of part of my issue with the first season. Like, I get why they did it that way, but I'm like, everyone's acting like
it's outrageous.
Nancy's committing like a felony, and just
she's going off the wild side. She's like stealing from stores and lying to people, and she's just over here hanging out with a cute boy.
Like, literally all Nancy is doing is like a cute boy took interest in her. They're dating. She drinks a beer. She goes to have sex with him. Like, not, and on top of that, it's not even a hookup. They're in love with each other. So It's not like she's not doing anything weird. She's doing very typical, normal teenage stuff. And to Steve's credit, he's the only person in that season who treats the situation like I think as it should be treated, which is this is a normal thing that people do. Everyone else is acting like she suddenly declared an interest in joining the circus or selling cocaine or something. Like they're acting like, you know what I mean? Like she's doing something bizarre and abnormal, but she's not.
Yeah.
And like that obviously gets to her. Like again, like when you're that age, that eats your self-esteem. I mean, we're talking the 80s here. This is a time period where, there's lots of things we didn't talk about back then that we definitely talk more about now. When you get to the season 2, you have that scene where it's like, it's okay, Nance. That, all these people, Murray included, convince Nancy, they get into her head and, make her doubt herself when she's, her and Steve just got into this fight and she's in a vulnerable place and she wants just for Barb and she's missing her best friend, the person she should lean on. She can't lean on anybody else because all her mom does. I mean, I think Karen had the best of intentions, but she winds up basically slut-shaming Nancy and not listening to her or Mike's concerned. Like, Nancy and Mike are freaking out being like, something horrible has happened to Barb and Will. Why is no one out seeing this? And like, no one is looking, like the deputies aren't really looking for Barb. Like they're useless. And the only one helping Joyce, like obviously not helping Joyce, who at this point of the series is an alcoholic womanizer with a pill problem. Like, you know what I mean? Like they have the town crazy lady and like the
he's like a rundown cop kind of thing, And he came down from the big city. He knows this place is chill and easy and he doesn't have to really do his job. And he's fine with that.
Yeah, and like Nancy doesn't even have that because no one is really looking for Barb. Because, and again, like I don't think that's Hopper's fault. Like Joyce is obviously distraught. He realizes this. He realizes she's not going to give up on this. He goes to help her, right? And he slowly realizes, oh, she's right. But like, it makes sense. You distribute resources. He can't both look into Barb's and Will at the same time, so he puts his deputies on it. Which, if he had been right and they were just cutting class, or Barb had actually run away, or Will was with a relative, which, like, he's not wrong. 9 out of 10 times in real life, that is what happens if a kid goes missing, right? So, if he had been right, it makes sense that you would delegate that. But because that's not what happened. It's that 1 out of 10, like Joyce says, no one is really looking for Barb until, the Hollands don't start like really realize that something is terribly wrong until season 2. And by that point, there's nothing left to be done, but they don't know that, of course. And so, like, because of that, Nancy has nobody to turn to. These adults I think they are well-meaning. They are legitimately trying to be, they think in their minds they're being helpful.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, crazy stuff doesn't normally happen often, especially doesn't happen in Hawkins. To have it go from like such a chill time to something absolutely as crazy as it is, it's really hard to put your mind there, and assume that that's what's going on. Instead, you're just trying to be like, let's not cause panic and assume the worst. Occam's razor, it's going to be fine. Maybe it's just lost in the woods. It's fine.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so I think, these adults are well-meaning, but they inadvertently, in trying to be helpful, sow seeds of doubt for Nancy when she's already in a vulnerable position and she doesn't have anybody to lean on. And so that ultimately is what pushes her to, cheat on Steve and get with Jonathan, because he's the only one who feels like is willing to help her or get justice. And so, like, I understand, as much as I don't agree with her decisions, I think that's, to me, what differentiates Nancy from Jonathan is, even when Nancy makes the wrong choice, because we really see inside her mind and her feelings, you can see where she's coming from. She's coming from a place of grief, of distress, of feeling lost, of feeling insecure. And so even when her decisions don't make sense, it's like, okay, you see what's causing it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas with Jonathan, like, we don't really get much, even now, even this season, we don't really get much into what he's thinking. We don't really get a really clear picture of that. So I think for me anyway, looking back from season 4, I was like, his behavior went from being like, which was already like not good, went from that to being like, okay, like, what are his motivations? What's he doing? Because, it's like he does all this horrible stuff, like, in the, coming back to that, I mean, he knowingly initiates sex with somebody else's girlfriend, who he then attends school with for the rest of that semester. And, like, that's not an okay thing to do. Like, he's not grieving. He's not, like,
not only that, but like when Murray's already doing the creepy pushing and stuff, Jonathan encourages it. When he's like, name, and he like snaps his fingers, and Jonathan's like, Steve, he immediately is like, ooh, this is my chance, and hops on it. Like, he doesn't even hesitate to think about, is this the wrong, maybe not okay thing to do? I really don't get Jonathan in situations like that, where they just, I mean, I know he's like a writer, like fill-in spot most of the time, but it's so out of character to how he is with Will and his mom and their relationship, and how they try to portray him as a character. It's really weird how they just kind of flip-flop back and forth with him. He never, in a weird way, and it makes no sense to use this as the term, but he's kind of a loose cannon, because he does things you do not expect his character to ever do, and then he goes right back down to the other character, and then he goes and does something completely unpredictable, and then he goes back to the other character. Which, I mean, I write a lot of fanfic, so I write Jonathan pretty often, and I normally have to go to the character that makes the most sense to me, and that's how his relationship is with Joyce, how his relationship is with Will, the conversation that he has with Will in season 4, that kind of stuff. You get those little hints into the actual kind of character that they're trying to portray horribly, because there's those other standout moments that you're like, well, who the hell is this? Like, that's not the same guy. That's not the guy that's like waking up at like 5 a.m. to like cook food for his family and worry about them and do like a double shift because he's worried that they're not going to be able to pay their electric bill and stuff on time. Like, that's not the same guy. He's a completely different thing. And some of it's to drive plot, and some of it's because they clearly don't know what to do with him. So just yeah, he's a frustrating character to work with.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like people were very harsh on Joyce. I saw a lot of comments online, particularly on Twitter, about this season, about like, how did she not know what was going on with Jonathan? I don't blame her at all because I mean, like, look at this in context. She, we know she was working. They moved from Hawkins to California. We know she had some of their job likely in sales. At the time that Elle was writing at the beginning of season 4, she's recently gotten the job selling encyclopedias from home. She clearly took that job from home to be around the kids more. But
The kids. Mm-hmm.
she recently took that job. Right up until now, she's been working outside the home, probably like pretty long hours.
Yeah.
I mean, you can tell that like when Will's talking to Mike, it's like, yeah, like Owen's has been good to us. They have a nicer house. People point out they're able to buy like the nicer syrup. You know what I mean? Like they're able to buy nicer things than they could before. But in order to maintain that lifestyle, she's got an extra kid, right? So she has 2 teenage boys and a teenage girl. Teenage boys look like wolves, and she's got to feed herself. And so in order to maintain that lifestyle, like she has to be, working pretty hard and pretty consistently.
I also kind of go back and forth on Joyce on one thing, but the biggest thing I don't go back and forth on is a lot of her parenting with the actual kids. The moment that we see with her and Jonathan doesn't necessarily mean that moment has happened a lot. It's a standout moment that probably either hasn't happened often or is only happening now in this moment because he's dealing with, his stuff about Nancy. He had that whole conversation with Argyle. He's obviously not coping very well, so he's going to get worse and worse. So maybe this is an escalation from something that she saw normally as not being that very apparent. We're seeing it, and it seems very obvious now, but maybe that's only because it's obvious now, right?
Yeah, that's kind of how I took it, because, at the start of that season, we see him, like, clearing the smoke out of his room.
Yeah,
so, like,
trying to hide it.
So, to me, I took that as, okay, she obviously knows something is going on with him, but knowing that something is going on with one of your kids and knowing what that is when you're...
Two different things.
And she's got 3 kids that she's taking care of and working long hours. And since, like, Argyle has been driving them around... The implication, like they're after at the roller rink, Argyle and Jonathan are hitting golf balls, at cars, which to me indicated that like Argyle works, but when Argyle's not working, him and Jonathan are doing that. Will and Elle are, doing stuff around town or painting or doing something, just making things in their rooms. So it doesn't sound like they're home an awful lot. And like Dustin later makes the comment that when they can't get through the buyers, like, hey, something is wrong. Dustin's like, oh, it's Joyce's new job. Like, Will complains about it all the time. She's constantly on the phone. So if your phone's constantly tied up, of course you're not hanging around the house because you're just listening to your mom sell encyclopedias. You can't even call your friends or your girlfriend or your boyfriend anyway. So it makes sense that they're not home. And like clearly Jonathan's doing a good job of hiding up until that moment, because Joyce and Murray go in to Jonathan's room to use his stereo equipment. And how do I say this? When you're smoking a lot of weed, you can typically smell it. So whatever Jonathan is doing to mask it is clearly working, because they don't smell, like neither of them clue into anything. It's not until the dinner where Murray's like, yeah, I know what's up.
Yeah, not only that, but before that moment, pretty much any other time you see Jonathan, he is very functional. That scene is probably, I think, the worst that you see him all season. It is that one moment, which if we're seeing only that one moment all season, why does everybody automatically assume that that's a regular thing? I mean, I understand that the fans have a really difficult time with critical thinking and don't want to do it because the Duffers don't handhold so much. But there are like little things like that where I kind of wish they'd speak out and say it verbatim. Like, just don't assume that everything you're seeing is surface level happening all the time. Like that one moment is a standalone moment. It doesn't necessarily mean that's because if that's what she was seeing all the time, she would have known.
Yeah.
She is from that era. She has seen Flower Children. Okay. She knows the Beatles. She knows the people that listen to the Beatles. She knows this stuff. She's not just going to sit there and not understand why he's all spaced out and stuff. She's going to eventually put it together once you see it a couple times. Like Murray picks up on it as quick as he is, but the guy is on a different level. Sometimes it's an unfortunate level, but he's on a different level.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was my take too.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, I felt like some fans are a bit too harsh on Joyce, because I can see why she knew something was up but didn't know what it was. Why, like you said, like his behavior around Joyce and Will is very different than the way he is with the rest of the time. The
Yeah.
side that everybody else sees. So I get why they don't know who he really is, right? Because they, obviously you want the best in your child, and Will and uh, Jonathan up until prior to season 4 have always been very, very close. So I can see why they don't really see this other side of him. That only starts to kind of come out as he kind of loses it and kind of goes off the rails in season 4. And so we kind of see, like you said, we kind of see that moment where it's like that's the worst we see him at all season.
Yeah.
It's kind of coming out there. And so like when he's around Will and Joyce, he's this loving family member who's very supportive. Like you said, he's getting up early to make breakfast. He's checking in. He's very supportive of his mom. He's working. He works throughout the first 3 seasons and prior to contribute to his, their income to make sure they can pay their bills, make sure he can go to a good school. He's got dreams and ambitions of going to NYU. He has a hobby that they think is a positive thing. They don't know what he's out there really doing. So I'm not surprised that they, I think the real Jonathan would probably be quite a shock to them because they don't ever see that side of him until he kind of starts to unravel. And even then, only Will kind of sees part of it. Like, he just sees that, like, his brother's dealing with shit and he started smoking a lot of weed and is kind of going off the rails. But that's a far cry from knowing about all the other stuff he's got up to. Like, it's not a straight line. Like, your brother suddenly starts smoking a bunch of weed and is kind of out there is very different than, like, that doesn't make him a bad person. You know what I mean? Like, that's very different from, like,
yeah, a lot of teenagers have that kind of phase. I know my older brother had that kind of phase. A lot of teenagers kind of go that route. They either get peer pressured into it or whatever ends up happening ultimately for them. It's not an unsurprising route for someone going through what he's going through. And he's already a loner. Those kind of people in general are kind of loner people. So they probably end up meeting one. It's not unrealistic, especially for the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, and again, there's not a straight line between that and, like, taking creepy pictures of people or cheating with somebody else's girlfriend or, not doing anything about the workplace misogyny that you're witnessing or being a really crappy boyfriend. Like, it's not a straight line. Like, someone can, suddenly, kind of be into that 420 lifestyle and still be a perfectly good person. Like, this is a de-evolution for Jonathan, but those two things are not a straight line.
Yeah, they kind of assassinated his character a good couple of times. And when you look at those moments, I mean, they do it in other shows all the time where they ruin a character. There's things like Queer as Folk and Buffy itself that have character spirals that you see coming from a mile away and you see the build up to them. Where Jonathan, it literally happens in episode 2. And then it just kind of comes around again, like kind of like a hurricane, like that side of the hurricane comes back around and you're like, oh, Jesus. And it's not characteristic to him at all. Like, it shows very clearly early on that he has feelings for Nancy. And then he goes straight into taking pictures of her. Like, he's not shown to be a stalker before that point. It's kind of very strange. And then after that, they're kind of in each other's orbit, so they're hanging around each other. But I don't know. It's just it's frustrating. It's just, I can't imagine how frustrating it is for Jonathan fans to have to defend him for those moments, because you're like, you want to ask the writers to throw you a bone and give you a reason and justify that kind of thing, but really, is there a way to justify those kinds of things? They're pretty bad things.
Yeah, and I do get that people identify with this character, and so that must be hard for them.
Yeah.
But the grander point I was kind of coming to was, I've seen a lot of fans comment on the fact that scene where Nancy and Steve are talking and Steve says it's okay, that, because all these people get into Nancy's head and make her doubt herself, and because Jonathan is just kind of doing whatever he wants without any kind of thought for how his actions affect other people apart from Will and Joyce until season 4, when that goes out the window too. She's experiencing doubt. The adults around her not helping. She cheats on Steve with Jonathan, and then when her and Steve kind of come back together, it's clear that she's obviously regretting that choice. But I've seen other fans comment on it. I totally agree. It's that all these people have been putting thoughts in her head about all the things that Steve is not, that she's settling by being with him, blah, blah, blah. He's not this, he's not that. But then when they come back together in season 2, you can tell that she sees that actually, like, she has this moment of like, yeah, all these other people are wrong because Steve is this person. He can be the person I need him to be. He can be someone who's there for the kids and does the right thing and is helpful and is willing to, fight alongside me. Yeah, we've been fighting about this because he wanted to take a different approach earlier, and there's nothing wrong with that. But he is totally capable of being the person I need him to be. He can rise to the challenge. He can be all these things. He's not what people says he is. But as she kind of realized that, as they're kind of, pinning up the, what do you call it, like the tarping, like in the shed, and they're doing all that. You can tell that she's kind of realizing that, but in the following scene, when before she leaves is, he's clearly realized that something happened. Either she doesn't know if Nancy and Jonathan made out or if they said, he knows something happened. So before she has a chance to kind of address that, he gives her his blessing, says, it's okay, walks away. And Nancy's kind of left there being like, well, damn. Like, to me, that's why she doesn't say anything. I kind of saw that as she's realized in these moments that, like, man, like, that was a stupid thing for me to do because, I let all these other people get inside my head and convince me, and partly because of my grief, that this isn't the person I should be with. I've now just been smacked in the face and reminded that that's completely false. But I've already made this choice. Steve knows I've made this choice. He's man enough to be like, like, if this is what you want, or this is what's better for you right now, like, I want you to be happy. Go and be happy. Go and be with him. Go and support him in this moment. I'll look after the kids. Everything will be fine. And so then she just kind of has to stick with this. In my mind, anyways, like, she's made a choice. She regrets it. It's sunken cost fallacy, right? She's made this choice now. Everyone around her is telling her this is the right choice to be making. She's made the choice. Now she must stick with the choice. It's one of those moments where it's like, in that moment she realizes, this is ridiculous. Steve can be all these things, but now I've made this choice. At least that's how I see it. I don't know how you saw that scene. That's how I kind of saw it.
I kind of saw it as something similar a little bit, for sure. I definitely see her realizing she messed up. She made a mistake. You can see immediately the regret and guilt on her face. I fucked up. I did something wrong. But she can't undo that. And just like her responsibility with what happened to Barb and her guilt with that, she holds on to this one too. And Nancy's the kind of person that she just sits with it. She just sits with what she's done for herself. She doesn't, when Steve says it's okay, she doesn't speak up or say anything. She's very passive. She just immediately lets what happened happen because she made her choice. Now she realizes that was the wrong choice and she regrets it and she wishes she could take it back. But she's like, just like Barb's death, I can't take this back either. And she just kind of deals with it. And she's that kind of person. She doesn't really, she doesn't really try to fix it. She's going to sit with it as long as she can possibly sit with it until it literally eats her alive or makes her ruin her relationships, which is what she did with Steve and what she's currently kind of doing with Jonathan. Granted, Jonathan's a second participant in this moment, more so than Steve ever was. But she still kind of waits until it gets to that, that point where she just can't take it anymore. And she breaks or she snaps or whatever happens. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen with that in season 5. But yeah, that's kind of how I see that moment. She just kind of realizes and she just kind of sits with it.
Yeah, I like that take too. I definitely think she's the kind of person that she has a hard time, confronting kind of her own actions and what happened and dealing with the guilt and the shame and the grief and the pain of what's happened to her in those moments. Which I think is interesting because, her big issue with Steve, and I think she kind of lacks self-awareness in that way. Her big issue with Steve in seasons 1 and 2 is he wanted to just pretend everything was normal because he was scared and that was his way of coping with it. And the threat from the government is real. It's not fake. It's real. It's a perfectly reasonable trauma response, but she wanted to fight. She wanted to do something. She needed to find Barb, and then she had to get justice for her. But basically, like, okay, once that's accomplished, like, Nancy basically does the same thing. She pretends everything is fine with her and Steve. She doesn't talk to him about how she's feeling. He obviously knows something is up, but she won't talk to him until it all comes out at the Halloween party. Then they fight. Then instead of dealing with it, she goes and, goes off with Jonathan, convinces him to help her. They wind up sleeping together. And then rather than dealing with what happened, she just stands there and lets Steve walk away. So rather than dealing with that stuff head on, she just kind of lets everything happen to her, which I think is part of her character that kind of comes out. Like, I think that's part of her trauma response, because we don't really see that in her before Barb goes missing. Like, before that, she's much more active.
She's very active, yeah.
And to me, that's like her. So I think it's interesting that, what I think makes the fact that they're coming full circle in the storyline so great is that was her big criticism with Steve, but she does it herself with everything but what happened to Barb. Like, he does it specifically with what happened to Barb. She does it with everything else, but she can't see that because she's so clouded by grief.
Yeah.
So I just think that's really interesting that they're coming full circle back to that. And I'm glad that they're closing out her storyline by addressing that, because my issue of the last few seasons was always like, okay,
they
but
didn't address it
at all. Like,
they just stuffed it under a blanket and was like, "We'll just pretend that's not there."
Yeah,
like
my
okay.
big thing, when we got to that season 1, like I finished it again, I'd never seen it before, and so I was like, "What?" Like when she's in the hospital room, like get Will back, I'm like, "That's it? We're not addressing the fact that Barb's not coming back? What the heck?" I was so angry, and then we do get like some stuff at the beginning of the following season, but I'm like, it wasn't enough for me. And I think her relationship with Steve is kind of the same way, where like, it feels unfinished. And so I didn't expect them to ever come back to that, because normally in a show when they kind of leave stuff like that, they don't come back to it. So
the Duffers actually seem to kind of just hold on to stuff. It's almost like they keep it close to the chest until they need to bring it out and use it. And I like to think that they have a forethought in some of these really big ones that kind of change everything around them. I'd like to think they had revisiting Stancy planned from the start, because there's many interviews with Natalia, Dyer, and Joe Keery, like constantly about them mentioning, I don't think everything's done with them. I think, I think they're going to come back together. Something's going to happen there. I don't think that's finished. And I honestly thought I had hope when I read those kind of interviews and saw that kind of stuff at the time. But then season 3 hits and you have like one interaction between them, and it's not a blink and you miss it, but really blink and you miss it. Like, it's so fast, especially for screen time. It's so fast, and they leave you to kind of read into it. Did he hit the car because of Nancy? You don't see Steve's perspective of that moment, so you don't really understand what kind of thought went into that. Granted, it's Steve. There's probably not a lot of thought. It's all instinct. It's all go, go, go. He's just going to figure it out afterwards. But, you kind of assume, just like in season 1, and he went in and saved her, maybe this is the same thing. But after a season of nothing, the first time I watched it around, I didn't even have shipper goggles on when I watched that moment. I was just like, oh yeah, Steve saved the day. Yep, Steve being Steve. Always doing the Steve thing. I didn't really think of it in that moment, because they'd been so detached and removed from each other at that point that I was like, okay, we're moving on from this. It's over. It's finished. Finito. It's gone. And I just kind of assumed from there that we weren't going to see it at all again.
Yeah, I didn't think we were either. And so I was like pleasantly surprised when we came back to that. Although if you've seen that, I think people were talking about this in the Discord server the other day, but that post that someone did from season 3 where they're like, wow, like now that like Steve and Nancy have broken up, Joe Keery and Dyer have no screen time because they have such strong chemistry. If they gave them screen time this season, it would be so incredibly obvious that like Charlie Hatton and like Natalia Dyer don't have any chemistry, don't have that same level of chemistry.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like, and I was like, yeah, like I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, because if you gave them legitimate screen, like what they did in season 4, it's like
they're on fire. They're on fire immediately.
They're on fire immediately, and then when you see Nancy and Jonathan reunited at the end of the season, it's like, what the hell? Like, there's nothing there.
The only time that I've ever felt that Natalia and Charlie had any kind of real chemistry is in the moments where it's mostly Charlie and Natalia and not really Jonathan and Nancy. It's the end scenes of season 3, right? It's that moment when he's leaving. It's the moment in the bedroom. And every time I look at that moment, I've rewatched that moment many times. I don't ship Jancy. I'll be honest. I mean, I'm on a Stancy episode for a reason, guys. I don't ship Jancy at all. So I try to look at that moment and I love that moment. That's the only moment with them that I love at all. But I try to look at it and see the characters, and I just don't. What I see is two adults who are married and comfortable with each other and in their own space. I could literally see that kind of moment coming from, like, you know, two loving adults in a show like, I don't know, like The Office, like take it Jim and Pam in like season 8. I could totally see that kind of moment between them. And it's not Jonathan and Nancy whatsoever. The way that they act in that scene, it has nothing to do with the characters as far as I'm concerned. The closest they come to having that kind of chemistry as actual Jonathan and Nancy is kind of the scene in where they're developing the picture of the Demogorgon the first time in season 1, which is the scene where technically he apologizes for taking the pictures of Nancy. That's the closest he comes. But he plays Jonathan in that scene as just very shy and being nervous to even look at her. And you can tell he's kind of intimidated by her. That's the closest they ever come to having any kind of actual chemistry as the characters themselves. Joe and Natalia are by each other for 2 seconds. They just look at each other and the whole world is on fire. It's really hard.
They have, fantastic chemistry. I completely agree with that. So coming back to the central question that we have then in season 2, do you think Steve was right to let Nancy go at the end of that season?
That's 100% Steve's choice at that point. I feel like people, you know, you don't really get Steve's whole train of thought right there, right? They don't make it extremely obvious. You can see stuff on Joe's face and kind of make the assumptions that you want. I'm pretty sure from the moment he sees them, like when he has the flashlight and they walk up with the kids and everything and he says, Nancy, I'm pretty sure he immediately knows what happened. Not that he assumes maybe they kissed or something. I think he knows that they had sex, that they're together, and that this is the end of anything happening moving forward with him and Nancy. He then has the rest of the night to figure out how to handle that. He has the moment where he's watching Nancy comfort Jonathan, comforting Will, and he sees how it's affecting Nancy, and he makes that choice himself. I think, yes, he was right in making that choice. Based on the other things that happened before that put him into that position to have to make that choice, I think that's the only way you go. If you really, really, really love someone, and it's very clear that Steve is deeply in love with Nancy, you let them go. Because if they love you, they will make the choice to come back. That's them. And he knew that pushing her anymore would not be the right choice. Because honestly, everybody else spends so much time, as you said yourself, spends so much time pushing Nancy here, pushing Nancy there. Steve is the only one that makes the noble choice in letting her have that choice. He said it's okay. If she wanted to make the decision herself, she would have fought for him, and she didn't. That was her choice. He gave it to her. I think it was the only thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. Like, as much as I was sad to see the relationship end, I think...
Same. Heartbroken.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking. But, I mean, it's like you said, like, you know, as the saying goes, if you love someone, set them free.
Yeah.
You know, like, if someone really loves you, they will either fight for you or they will come back when they're ready. You know, if you have to keep working at something or pushing them, then it's not meant to be. Like, I was at Run for the Friend today, and we were talking about our friends, and we were joking about how you always hate the people your friends or your family are dating because there's just so many like trashy people out there. And it's true. Like, I rarely off the top of my head, I can think of one person. I have a cousin that I'm close to, and he got married. I think 2020. Yeah, his wife, wonderful person. Genuinely, really do love her. That's the only person off the top of my head I can think of who has dated somebody like a close cousin, a friend that I actually like.
Yeah,
Because
I've never really thought of that, but I definitely feel the same. Looking back on, I have 4 siblings, and all of them have been in many and multiple relationships, and I can safely say that I haven't liked a single one of them, which I've never given any thought to, but they're just all bad people. And I'm pretty sure they haven't liked any of mine either, so, whoops. Well.
yeah, it's like there's just so many trash people. Or like if you're close to somebody, you hear about all the drama. And my friend and I were talking about this. It's like, yeah, you hear about this and like you hear them describe things that happen, and you're like, that's not a. You think to yourself, like, that's not a good person, or like they don't treat you well, or they're really dumb, or they're just not a good fit for you, or you're not a good fit for them. And so, as much as it hurt when to see that relationship end, like if you love someone, set them free. We're both saying your relationship should be the easiest thing in the world. Like that's something I've learned as I've gotten older. When you're younger, it's like this big tumultuous thing, and you get older and you realize no, like your relationship with your significant other or people, like whatever that is, should be the easiest thing in the world. If it is not, if it is constant work, like if it is like it's like, oh, race to hard work. I'm like, no, they have challenges, but it should be the easiest, like lack of stress, stressless like thing in the world. If it is extremely stressful or hard, you are with the wrong person.
Yes, because your partner, your person that you're with, needs to be your best friend. They should be. If they're not the person that you go to immediately to tell something to, or if they're the person that you want to watch things with, experience things with, that's your partner. That if you're not experiencing that, if you feel like you have to withhold things from them, or if you find yourself going to somebody else over them, either because you just feel like they wouldn't understand or they wouldn't sympathize or they wouldn't be on your side, you probably shouldn't be with them at all. Like that's probably the biggest red flag, is not feeling like they're your person, because they are your person. You chose them, they chose you.
Yeah, 100% agree. So like we were talking about this today, and I was just thinking about this in the context of Stancy, and that like Steve makes the right call there. That like as much as he loves her, but he loves her enough to be like, all right, this clearly isn't working. You're not able to communicate to me what you need. The way I'm approaching this isn't working for you. I love you enough to let you go. I can see that you and Jonathan have something. If that's what you want, that's the choice you're making. It's okay. You don't have to, like, he releases her from, he tries, again, it's on her, but like, he does his part to like release her from that guilt and be like, go be happy, basically. Like, go do what you need to do. I'll always love you kind of a thing. That's, he's always says it's okay, but you can hear the weight behind his words. And so all of the guilt and shame and the regret that Nancy carries, Nancy puts that on herself, because as we see later in season 4, Steve isn't angry. He doesn't blame her. He doesn't even seem to hold anger towards Jonathan
at all.
And which, I mean, that takes a big person. I'm not that person.
No, me neither.
No,
not at all.
Not at all. Like
Steve is better than me.
That guy's tires.
Absolutely.
Like, and I think it shows real growth and real maturity. Like it's rare to find a person who can do that. Never mind a man.
Yeah, not only does it's weird though, right? Because it shows the maturity that he is already kind of there for the in the shape of the kind of person that Nancy needs. Because he makes that choice. He makes the hard choice to let her go. The choice that Jonathan has never been able to do, and is showing in season 4 that he literally can't do and is too terrified to do. He just wants to keep ignoring it until inevitably she breaks up with him. He wants to put that responsibility on someone else, where season 2 Steve was already ready and did it. Like, he knew that pushing her was just going to make their already struggling relationship and failing relationship worse. And especially after things that happened between her and Jonathan, it was just not the right thing to do. But he proves that he's already there. Jonathan is not there and has never really been there. He's just kind of been the easy choice. She doesn't have to do anything to be with Jonathan. She doesn't have to make any kind of effort to be with Jonathan.
Yeah, and like that's a really good point too. Like I've often seen it as, being with Jonathan, you're right, doesn't take any effort. She doesn't have to be emotionally vulnerable with him. She doesn't have to talk about the hard stuff because like
he'll ignore it too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like as they made clear in season 4, clearly her and Jonathan have never really talked about what's happened to them. Certainly not talked about Barb's. Like they're not talking about the hard stuff. There's no effort because the only time we see them have a difficult conversation or when Nancy does try in season 3, Jonathan does not support her, does not
he stonewalls her. He stonewalls her completely and guilt trips her immediately.
And then they get into the fight in the car.
Yeah, and she says in the fight in the car that what she says implies that he has done this multiple times in the past, that they are having pushback between each other, and he still doesn't understand. She says the Oliver Twist routine again. She is implying that this is happening over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, and like her whole line about like, I guess, we don't really understand each other anymore. Maybe we never did, that whole thing. Mm-hmm. And the only reason, like legitimately, the only reason they wind up back together at the end of that season is because Nancy turns out to be right and it has something to do with Will. If that had not been the case, either she'd been right and hadn't had something to do with Will, or she turned out to be wrong. I think her and Jonathan would have broken up right then and there. And Probably. They never would have gotten back together, and her and Steve probably would have wound up getting back together sooner because like that is literally the only reason. Because they both basically say, like we don't see things the same way. We're never going to. Neither of them want to put in the effort to see things from the other person's perspective. And that doesn't change unless you put in the effort. So yeah, I agree. She doesn't have to put in any effort there, whereas I think Steve pushes her in the sense that like being with him requires being emotionally vulnerable. It requires her to push herself. It requires her to meet Steve halfway to build the kind of life that Steve wants them to have, the kind of life they could have together. And it requires being extremely involved with the kids and Steve's friends and the life he's built for himself, whereas Jonathan doesn't require that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Jonathan doesn't really require anything. And I don't think it's really necessarily that Steve is a lot of work, but he tests her a little bit. He has pushback in any way, shape, or form. And not only that, but he's what people think is the easy choice while simultaneously not being the easy choice for her. Jonathan is just a relationship that, Jonathan is already seeking her out and making that effort. And Nancy doesn't have to do anything. He comes to her. Where Steve, pretty much since, probably even season 1, I don't know. I'd be curious to know how they got back together before Christmas and everything. It's definitely implied that Nancy waited for Jonathan, but I'd bet you anything that Nancy was the one that went to Steve first, because he makes it pretty clear any other time you see them around each other that he is perfectly fine waiting for Nancy to make that move. In the bedroom, before they even have sex, she's the one that makes the move. He was probably not going to do anything. You see the look he gives her when he turns back and he's like, yeah. He's surprised that she stopped him. He's surprised when she takes her shirt off. He is waiting for her to make that move. In season 2, he gives her the chance to, say, it's not okay. Like, what are we doing? And he walks away and he leaves it to her. She makes the choice to not make the choice. He leaves it to her. So I imagine in that kind of situation, that's the hard choice for her, is where she actually has to do something, because she hasn't had to do anything.
No, and I think that comes directly from, he knows that she's dealing with a lot of trauma, but also, even before that, like, when he does take the initiative, when they have the making sex in the bathroom, he leaves the note, and then when they're studying, right, when he pushes her, she pushes back, sets a boundary, and to me, like, what that's a direct response to is like, okay, he pushed, he realized she wasn't comfortable with that, he respected that boundary, so after that, to me anyway, it comes across as Steve saying, okay, I need to wait for her and see what boundaries she wants to set, or she wants to do this. I'm gonna put this on the table and see what she wants to do, because I don't want to put her in a situation where she's uncomfortable, and that pays off for him. And so he's like, okay, this is a good approach to be taking. Like, I'm gonna respect her space. And then kind of inside that we have moments where like he's so in awe of her, like he's gawking at her, like she's beautiful, she's smart, she's funny. Like he kind of loses himself in the moment. She kind of has to like clue him back in and like remind him like some privacy, please, or like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
He's
like,
totally spacing out just looking at her because he's falling in love quickly. Poor thing, bless him.
And that's our show. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe and tell your friends. Our theme music is provided by Neon Knights. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ham Radio, a Stranger Things podcast. Please join us next time, same dial, same time.
Over and out.